Welcome to week 9 in mobile web applications. We're kind of combining week 8 and week 9 together because I opened the week 8 stuff asynchronously, but week 9 we're going to kind of cover it more in detail, more in depth, and do some live coding examples. So we've talked about PWAs a lot in the earlier first half of the semester, and now we're going to kind of build our own web apps that are a little bit more advanced than what we've been doing so far with the Hello World example with notifications and shortcuts with the PWAs. So we know what a PWA is, and we've kind of made some basic web apps, but now we're going to build web apps with a tool called ReactJS, and ReactJS is going to allow us to make modularized components, and it's going to take a really cool approach, a declarative approach instead of an imperative approach to programming web apps. And then we're going to be able to make those web apps into PWAs. So we're kind of going to learn a new technology, React, a new language, and I think you guys may be covering this in another class with your cross-platform. So some of this may be new, some of this may be repeat. That's fine. So it'll be good practice if you already know it, and it would be great to learn as a beginner. And then we're going to combine the React stuff that we've learned with the PWA technology and get kind of the best of both worlds, which is going to be an awesome web app that's cross-platform for everything. Cool. So what is React? What is React.js, and why would we use it? Well, to answer that question, we can go to the React.js website and check out what they say. So here's their website when you go to reactjs.org. And basically it says it's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So pretty simple explanation, JavaScript library. It's a nice sentence, but what does it really actually mean? Well, let's take a look here. So here I've got a GIF kind of repeating on Netflix. So you can just watch this as I talk about it. But consider an example like Netflix, a service or an application. It's a website. It's a web app. Oh, is it still playing? There we go. And it runs pretty smoothly when we work with it, right? So I went from my list to movies to home. It runs really smoothly, and we don't have to really wait for anything to load. There's nice transitions. And if we go to the My Lists page, we can pretty much instantly see the movies that are on the My Lists page. We don't have to wait for a new page to load here. It's all pretty nice. So we're using it in our browser, and this is a website, but it basically works like or feels like a mobile app, right? Even though we're using a website here, it feels really smooth. Now, because mobile apps give us a really highly reactive user experience, and we have those nice transitions, it's fun to use, things happen instantly. That's why it feels like an app when we're using this. Now, at least traditionally, websites didn't used to feel like this, like 5-10 years ago. Websites would feel a little bit clunkier. There'd be a request that's sent to the server, and then a new HTML page is sent back to the browser, and there's this request response delay where it feels a little bit slower and there's nothing instant happening, right? There's a little bit of lag or latency while we wait for that new HTML page to load. Now, when we use a surface like Netflix, it kind of feels like a mobile app. And we just talked about that request response cycle that happens. Well, what's happening is it's taking advantage of something called JavaScript. And we'll get into a little bit more about what that looks like on the next slide here. But here's a little example with the request and response graphic here, where you're the user, you request a page from the server, and then it comes back as an HTML page. And that's that clunky web page feeling where you click a button and wait for an action to complete. And here you can see this GIF on the left, how instant apps feel on a mobile device, because everything's loaded. There's no server request response. But because Netflix is using something called JavaScript, it actually eliminates any need for that latency or that request response. So we can actually, get rid of that waiting time or that latency when we're waiting for the server to load a new HTML page. JavaScript actually runs in the browser on the client's side. Okay, so you can actually manipulate the HTML structure or the document object model, we call it, the DOM, in the browser. So what that does is it allows us to change what the user sees without fetching a new page. So we don't have to present or we don't have to make a request. We can just present something new to the user. So because React is a JavaScript library, it can help us with that, right? So JavaScript, you can do this all with JavaScript. You don't need React to do that. But React is a library for JavaScript. So it actually is a building block, an extra piece on top of the JavaScript library that helps us with writing client-side JavaScript code. And it's all about building modern reactive user interfaces for websites. That's what it means when it says it's a JavaScript library. It's a building block that helps us update elements on the DOM, right? So if I show you this here, with JavaScript, we can do the first two. We can make a client-side, we can have a JavaScript library, right? We have access to that stuff. We also can build modern reactive user interfaces for the web, okay? But what ReactJS allows us to do is change the approach that we're doing with JavaScript from an imperative approach to a declarative approach. And I'll explain a little bit about what that means. But basically, with JavaScript, you have to write every single piece of code out in order of what you want to happen. Whereas what React does is you can build modules or components and reuse them, so you're writing a lot less code. Okay, so you're able to reuse your code and make it more efficient and complete things quicker. All right, so we're going to learn all the different features and tools ReactJS has, at least a beginner into React, and then we're going to learn how to make building complex user interfaces really easy. So the advantage that React provides us over normal JavaScript is, well, I'll actually show you with a little demo that I built, but basically, I'm going to show you a simple website that has some interactivity for a to-do list, and there's a button and it shows up and you can accept or close. Okay, so very simple button with a pop-up window. And then I'm going to show you how we can build this interactivity with JavaScript, and then what the code looks like. And then I'm going to show you how we can build this interactivity with ReactJS and what the code looks like. And it'll make it really clear. You'll see the advantages that React gives us when working with React over JavaScript. Now, one note, just so you know, you don't need Node.js, right, to work with React, but it's very, very helpful. So you'll see on the Blackboard, I made a little note about that. Do I need Node.js in order to work with React? So it's not required, but it would be very difficult to build a project without it, since almost all of the React libraries are Node.js packages. So Node kind of just makes our life way easier. Without Node.js, we also can't use something called Create React App, which is something that Facebook made that kind of gives you a template model to build your project off of. And we're going to use that. So you will require Node for the stuff that I'm going to be teaching you, but it's just good for you to know you don't need it in order to use React. It just makes it way, way simpler and easier, quick and easy. All right, so to install Node, you go to node.js or the website. I'm not exactly sure what the nodejs.org/en/download, and you have options for Windows installer, Mac installer, however you want to install it, MSI, exe. So get that started now, download it. I'll chat for a little bit, and then we'll talk about these projects. So if you download Node right now, I'll actually be able to show you how to install the project with Node. So there's just this instruction once you get that installed. So while you're doing that, I'll show you the example. So we'll come to my website here while you're downloading Node. I've got veneragon.ca/todo_JS. All right, so this is the version of my app made in JavaScript. So this is just pure vanilla JavaScript, no extra libraries. I'll show you the code for it. Yeah, if you already have Node, just make sure you're running the latest version, and then you're good to go, and I'll show you what we can do with it. So here's my JavaScript code, okay? I've got my index.html, my style.css, and my app.js. style.css, app.js, open. There we go. So I'll just show you these in Sublime. So here's my index.html. Pretty simple. We've got our head tag with references to our app.js. We've got a hello world, and then we've got a class of card and a div, h2 of learn React, and then we've got this button here. Okay, so we can see that that's what we've got, hello world with a card class. And then I've just got some styling for that card. It's giving it a border. We're giving it a bit of shadowing. When you hover over the buttons, it changes the background color a little bit. You can see, right? We've given it some alt text and then some background colors. Don't have to worry about that. That's just how I styled it to look like this, right? This is all pure vanilla HTML, CSS. And then here's the JavaScript code, okay? So as you can see, we've got the button that we've added an event listener to. So when I click it, it's going to call this function show modal handler. So a modal is just a word for a component, right? A modal is something like that button. And then inside of that function, we check to see if it exists on the document model. We get the element or the class name, right? We create the element, then we have to create the text inside of the element, then we have to create the class name so that the styles get applied to it, and then we have to apply event listeners to either close or open for both of the buttons. So you can see we have to do a lot of work over and over again to apply classes, text, content, event listeners, etc. And then what we do is if they close it, we also have to remove all of those things, those classes, those text elements, etc. So it's a lot of stuff that you have to write over and over just for 2 buttons. Okay, so that's my JavaScript. And you can see when I click it, I get a confirm window. I can hit confirm or I can hit cancel. It does the same thing. It just closes it. I can also click outside of the window and it closes it. I just changed the background color to dark gray so that this looks like it's popped out. Now, for example, I'm going to go to my website, but I'm going to go to the React version. And you can see it's going to be the exact same app. I click it, it closes. I click it, and it closes. But to show you the code for this, I'll go into my React code. We can see we've got a whole bunch more packages here. Now, I'll actually use Visual Studio Code to represent this because I can open the folder and then I can show you everything within the tree. So let me just minimize this and open it in Visual Studio Code. It might look a bit more confusing because you're not used to this project model, but if I file, open, oops, not file, file, open folder. Right off the bat, you're going to notice there's a ton more files, right? In the other example, we only had 3 files, but a lot of code. In this example, we have a lot of files, but inside of the files, the code is simplified and you're able to reuse it in a lot of different ways. So here's the folder. Here's my React app. I'll expand this. Now, don't worry about the build folder. The build folder is something that I output stuff to when I want to make a production model of the app. Node modules is all of the modules when we use Node.js to include our React libraries, so you don't have to worry about that. Our public and our src file folders are the most important. So we can see inside of my public, I've got my index.html. And in my index.html, I've just got the same thing, kind of links to my icons, links to my manifest.json, which you'll remember we used in PWAs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we've just got something called div ID root, okay? And that is the base for our entire app, okay? So there's nothing else on here. You won't see anything about hello world, learn React, this button, anything. But if we come back and we go into our components and we go into our src folder, whoops, we'll see app.js. And in here we can see we've got hello world, and we've almost got something like a custom HTML class. Instead of naming it div, we named it to do. And so we can just create our own custom HTML classes. And if I go inside my to-do.js, we can see all of the code in here. We've got something called props, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is almost like a placeholder that we pass into our text element here for a title. So we can see we've got a placeholder there. Then we can see we've got our button with a class, and we've just given it a function to call on click. We've got a delete text, and then we also have some placeholders down here where we're actually going to call some methods depending on what is clicked. So either close or the are you sure window. So we can kind of see what's going on here. It's a little bit confusing. You don't have to worry about it right now because we're going to get into the basics of JavaScript a little bit. I'm just showing you the differences between React and pure JavaScript. So there's a little bit more code off the bat, a little bit more files, but here's a super big advantage to it. If I come into this file, and this is how you'll run a React project on your server. I just did a shift right click and then an npm start, which will start a server that will serve the files up. It'll actually open up something on my local host. Now, the reason I'm not doing it on my browser is because then I would have to use the FTP and download the file and change it and upload it. So I'll just do this on the local host example. But once it's actually loaded in my local host here, which always takes a minute to get the server started, what we can do is very simply, I'll close the JavaScript example. We can come to our app.js, right, which is the root. This is where we set our entire app up, right? So we just show our app and we call it root. And then in index.html, we've now made a div of root. Okay, so that's what's happening. I can take this custom element of our to-do HTML element, I can copy it. I can put a break in, just an easy HTML break. Here it is in our local host to do React. It's loading. There it is. There's our app on our local host server. So I come here to the code and I just paste my to do HTML element. And I'm just going to change the text here. I'll save it and check out this. Instantly, if I refresh this, there's the advantage to using React. There it is. I just duplicated all of that code in one line. And I'm able to make these modals very quickly. And I can reuse components like buttons, cards, notifications, blog posts, and you can reuse the design really easily. And that's the advantage of React. If we wanted to do this in JavaScript, we'd have to write it all out again. And look, I can click this button and it realizes that this is for this card. So if we were to do it in pure JavaScript, we would have to give each element its own unique class ID, and each pop-up window would have to relate to that class. If I hit confirm here, it might close it for a different card. Whereas in React, it knows which modal it belongs to. Cool. So if you want to run the code that I put on Blackboard, you're going to have to follow some of these steps. First, you're going to have Node installed on your machine. So you might have to type npm install. So if you go to week 8, and I've got the code in here, and you download the to-do_react zip file, what you're going to get is something that will look like this, but you won't have a build folder and you won't have a node modules folder. Then you're just going to want to open your command prompt and cd to the path that you saved the folder. Or what I like to do is I shift right click and open the PowerShell window. And then you're just going to type npm install. And what that will do is install the necessary node package manager dependencies for this project. Okay. And then once it's finished installing, then you just have to run npm start. Okay, and then you've got that running on your machine once npm has installed all of the packages. Okay, so that is how you do it. Then you run npm start, and then the JavaScript version, all you have to do is just double click the index.html page. You don't have to run a server for that or install any node packages. So that one's a lot easier. You just download the code from this GitHub link, and then you can run it, and you'll get something a lot like this. Cool. Okay, so continuing in the PowerPoint, just going to pause the recording here. Any questions so far? Have you guys learned React already with Mustafa? Are you guys, is it new to you? Is it just want to learn where you guys kind of are with React?
We are new, sir, to React.
So I'm pretty sure he said he was covering React.
Yes, React Native, but like we are learning it from the scratch only.
From the what only?
Also.
Sorry, you cut out a bit. Can you say that again?
We are learning, like we haven't learned it. We are learning it. Just created some screens using React Native.
Cool. Sweet. Okay. So then this will be good then. If he's covered it, maybe some of it will be similar, maybe some of it will be different, but sounds good. Okay. Is everyone caught up? Does anyone need some time to get the npm stuff installed, or are we all good? I saw some thumbs up. Cool. Sweet. Okay. I will continue the recording. Okay, so continuing in the PowerPoint here, to the next slide, building single page applications. So what do I mean with single page application? Maybe you already know what an SPA is or a spa. And it's not the spa that you go to a massage for. It's a single page application. And basically all of the code, all of the content is in one spot. You don't have to load a different .html from a server. So if you notice with Netflix, and I don't know, did I show it here again? I'll go to Netflix. Okay. You'll notice with Netflix, when I log in, and I go between my list and I go between movies, keep an eye. Okay, I'm on home, I'm on movies. Where is it? It's showing that it's changing the address, but it's not actually loading a different HTML page. So when I go like this, it's not actually loading a different HTML page. It's all in one single page application. So it's all from that index or app.js. Everything is being loaded from there. So let me expand a little bit, and you can visualize it here. With HTML and with React, we can use it to control parts of HTML pages, like this, just this little blue, say, blog post. And that's the widget approach, where it's a multi-page application. Some pages are still rendered by a backend server, and then some of the front end are React. Or what's more popular is you also can use it to control the entire front end of a web app. So you can control the entire front end. Everything's on one page. The server only sends one HTML page, and then after that, React takes over and controls the UI, where it's loading like the My List, it's loading the movies, and you can make it look like it's loading different pages, but that's why it's so quick, right? So it's more common with React to control the entire page. Cool. So to talk a bit about alternatives to React.js, just so you're aware, we will cover routing with React.js, we'll cover hooks, we'll cover all of those basic features. But React in general is the most popular, the most focused, and lean component-based library out of the following that you see on the screen. Some of it doesn't contain as many features as other libraries. If you want to use routing, for example, we have to use a third-party library from Node, but it is still possible. Now, there's also Angular, and Angular is another component-based UI framework, and it comes with TypeScript right off the bat, but it also comes with a ton more features. It's great for huge projects because it comes with so much, but if you're just building a smaller app, it can be really overkill, and the size of your app can be huge, and you don't need everything that it ships with in Angular. Now, Vue.js is newer, and it's kind of a mixture of Angular and React. It's a happy medium. It's component-based as well. So what I mean by component-based is when you build those little components and you can reuse them. All of these have that in common. And it ships with more features than React. So there's a little bit more core features there, but it's a little bit less popular because it's newer. So there's not as much community support if you wanted to go to forums and stuff like that and look up some problems that you're having. So that's why we've settled on React.js. It's by far the most it's by far the most popular, and you'll be able to find the most support for it out there. Now, to set up your IDE, hopefully you already have Visual Studio installed. So Visual Studio Code is what I was just using right here, this one, this IDE. And a couple extensions that I would get you to install that might be a good idea. You don't have to, but the first one is Prettier. and it's a code formatter for JavaScript. So it tabs and indents all of your code so that it's pretty and everything matches and it looks neat and it makes it easier to read as a developer. So Prettier is the first one, and what you have to do once you've installed it is go up into your settings, and then in your settings, so the way you get to settings from Visual Studio Code is file, preferences, settings, or control plus. And then in settings, you need to type in the word format, and then you have to choose what your default formatter is. So you can see here I chose the Prettier formatter, but look at all the different ones. Okay, and then that's it, it's saved. So you have to type format and choose Prettier as the default. The next extension that I would get you to install, and it's optional, but it's going to be something that I'll be using, is called Material Icon Theme. Oh, we've got a question from the chat here. Which language has more demand or scope in future? So it's an interesting topic, React or Flutter. So right now, React is definitely the most popular. It has more demand. It has, it's the industry standard. I was having an interesting conversation with a student from last class about this, and he said he had multiple interviews with some bigger companies, and they were testing him on the newer technologies that React just came out with hooks. They moved away from a class-based approach to using a hooked-based approach. And I think Flutter definitely has future. It's supported by Google, which is a giant company. There's not a lot of support in terms of community and forums for help. So I think it's still in those beginning early stages, but it does have some benefits over React, whereas it's written in the language called Dart. So it's a lot faster and it's a lot more snappier feeling. Now, Dart.js is a different syntax, so you'd have to learn that, but React is also new to you. So if you wanted to learn both, I have information on Flutter, and there's a folder that's open to you that you can go look at on Blackboard called Extra Content Flutter. And there's just a couple challenges and good blog posts and some material I've gathered that you can read about there. So for now, I would say React is probably what you'd want to learn. It's the industry standard. It's what everyone's using. When I was doing front-end web development, we were using React. But that's not to say anything can happen and Flutter could change and take over. But it's still pretty new. It's only the last couple of years that it's really been becoming popular. So the last theme, Material Icon Themes last extension, I would get you to install. You just install it like that, and then you're done in terms of setting up your IDE for using React. Cool. So that's that PowerPoint. We'll just end that there.
Can you please show us again how that format, where we find it?
Yep. So to format, change your default formatter. You go File, Preferences, Settings, and it will bring you to this page here. And then you just type in the word format, and then the first option that comes up is your default formatter, which defines the default formatter for all other formatter settings. And then from the drop-down list, you'll select Prettier if you've got that extension installed.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, of course. Cool. So I'll end this recording here, I believe, because I don't think there's anything else that I want to cover at the moment in this section of the video. So I'll just end this recording and then I'll start a new one talking about PWAs in React.